First, a little bit about the Hoosier Environmental Council. We are the state's largest environmental policy organization, as Jeff mentioned, and we are an organization that's committed to simultaneously advancing quality of life, economic growth, and environmental health, air and water and land. And the breadth of what we do is significant, both programmatically and in terms of the scope of activity that we do to address environmental issues. Research, awareness, finding solutions to significant environmental challenges, and then obviously engaging the public, legislators, and key stakeholders. HEC is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are supported by individuals as well as by foundations. We have held off on trying to get funding from specific type of companies to avoid conflict of interest concerns and to maintain a great degree of integrity in our positions. One of the things that I've been really proud of the organization is that we have built a broad network of partnerships and genuinely desire to build bridges quite widely. HEC's approach is quite simple, which is that the foundation of the work that we do is research, and spawning from that is legislative development and advocacy, state agency policy making, that is to say, being before various executive branch bodies, addressing local issues of an extraordinary nature, and then carrying out citizen training workshops. I think when we think about environmental issues, it oftentimes seems to boil down to the very local and the very global. This image, I think, nicely synthesizes how we interface with the environment on a daily basis. Recycling, maybe upgrading an energy efficient device, or going to a farmer's market, or being involved in a river cleanup. And then, again, on the other end of the spectrum is those problems that are of global nature, the Gulf oil spill, the melting of the ice caps, deforestation in different parts of the world. And HEC's focus is on Indiana. And like Jeff mentioned in the introduction, the state has made significant progress in terms of improving air and water quality over the last several decades. And I want to be clear that we acknowledge that great progress, which is very evident in what we see as we travel the state. But I think it's also important to keep in mind some statistics to be aware of. That in terms of air quality, we're ranked 4th in the nation in terms of the amount of mercury pollution that Hoosiers are exposed to. That according to the US EPA, we rank 2nd in terms of the amount of toxins getting discharged into our waterways. And that in terms of land, we continue to foster policies that ultimately lead to more sprawl and potentially forego the opportunity for developing what we already have. The other thing to consider is that even though there is no question that environmental quality has improved over the last several decades, we cannot be complacent about the possibility that there are serious environmental risks that our state and our country face. And here are 2 images that date back only to the last 10 or 12 years. On the left is an image from Martin County, Kentucky, a tremendous coal ash spill whose volume was about 7 times larger than the Exxon Valdez. And on the right was a spill, that spill took place in 2000. On the right is a spill that took place in December of 2008 in Kingston, Tennessee, for which the coal ash that contaminated the waterways was on the order of about 50 times greater than the Exxon Valdez. So again, though we've made great progress, we cannot be complacent that there are serious risks that are posed to the environment. Now, rather than giving a downcast presentation, I want to focus on opportunity. And I hope that this might allow for a reframing of how you might think of environmental groups. That for us, this is about fostering opportunity to improve the quality of life of Hoosiers and to advance economic development. Now, there are an array of issues that the Hoosier Environmental Council could focus on. And so I want to be transparent about the criteria that is driving how we focus our work. First, of course, we want to focus on issues that we think would have a significant environmental impact on Hoosiers all across the state, issues of statewide implication. We want to try our best to focus on those policy initiatives that will lead to an economic net benefit. There's no question that when you carry out environmental regulations, those are going to impose costs on business. But the idea is that the net benefit for our society is positive. We want to make sure that we are focusing on things for which we will galvanize support of our own membership, but also drive a lot of support among a lot of partners. And a great example of that is public transit, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And of course, we want to be bipartisan. We cannot move significant public policy in Indiana unless we garner the support of both political parties. And of course, pragmatically, as the Executive Director of HEC, I want to make sure that what we do is fundable. So what does that lead to? It boils down to 3 core strategic initiatives. That's what we call it, strategic initiatives. Healthier water, sprawl reducing transportation, and on-site clean energy. Those are the 3 focus areas that drive maybe 80 or 85% of the activity that we do. So let's talk about healthier water. Statistics from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, which is equivalent to the US EPA at the state level, has characterized that these are the 5 main sources of impairment to Indiana's waterways. Far and away, the #1 source of pollution to our waters is from pathogens. So that, again, is sort of the environmental scientific rationale for why we focus on pathogens. But then there's the economic rationale, and that, again, goes back to this principle of trying to move forward policy initiatives that both advance the environment and advance the economy. Here we're looking at 3 different images of places that have made a concerted effort to improve their water quality, and in so doing, fostered more economic revitalization. At the top you see is Milwaukee. On the left, bottom left, is Vincennes, and then on the bottom right is New Albany. So 2 communities right here in Indiana that have seen the river, that have seen water body revitalization as an important part of an overarching economic development strategy. Now the good news is that we have, in terms of cutting down pathogens that are getting discharged into our waterways and leading those waterways to be ones that we can't swim in or fish in, we're making some pretty significant progress in this arena. Combined sewer overflows, a term that I'm sure many of you have heard of. We are upgrading sewer infrastructure across the state, and it will lead to substantial reductions in pathogens. In addition, we are eliminating a lot of the old aging septic tanks that one can find in both urban and rural parts of Indiana. That, in turn, will reduce the amount of pathogens going into our waterways. Very encouraging progress. An area that we do want to put a spotlight on are mega hog and dairy operations. And I want to make it clear that this is not expressing any kind of hostility or focus on agriculture by any measure. I am proud to be a grandson of a farmer, a wheat and rice farmer, so it's very much in my blood. But the issue is really about science and about quantifying where pathogens are from and where we're making progress and where we need to make more progress. What you're looking at here is what's called the confined animal feeding operations. And what you see on the right here, this circle, is what's called a manure lagoon, which consists of massive amounts of manure that are generated by hog and dairy operations. And I apologize for talking about manure after you've eaten, but it's important to talk about this issue. And this gives you a sense of the scale of the amount of manure that is concentrated. There is a statistic that an average confined animal feeding operation generates as much waste as a small municipality. Now you may say, well, Jesse, that's all well and good, but how could this possibly account for being a major contributor to pathogens in Indiana? Well, here at the national level is a quantification of the total amount of manure generated from all sources. And what you'll see is that hogs and cattle, and this is, again, the caveat here is this is national data, but that hogs and cattle are the vast majority of the total volume of manure generated in the United States. Now the thing is, how we treat that manure is significantly different between human sewage and livestock manure. Human sewage, as we well know, often goes through potentially 3 sources of treatment: primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment, and that treatment will take place over large parts of the year. On the other hand, if you're talking about livestock manure, that is going to be placed in these lagoons, which may or may not be lined, and then spread over farm fields. And the problem is that inadvertently, some of that manure may end up percolating into our aquifers and potentially running off into our streams. And so there's a sense of equity that if we're going to make efforts, wonderful efforts, laudable efforts in reducing the amount of pollution that goes into our waterways from human sewage, we ought to do something to curtail the pathogen exposure that comes from animal waste. Now, the good news is that Indiana has made progress, and I would like to say that in part because of our efforts to advance legislation and to adopt legislation that will have the effect in net of reducing the amount of manure facing that percolates and runs off into our waterways. So this is an area where we made progress, but we need to make more. The other thing that I want to spotlight in terms of what we're doing to advance clean water is nutrients. That's, as you see here in these statistics, the fifth source of nutrient, of pollution in terms of our waterways. Now, what you see here is a blue-green algae bloom that took place in the Geist Reservoir. And the problem is this is a much more prevalent problem in Indiana, particularly in the northeastern part of our state, where excess phosphorus has gone into our waterways and led to significant growth of algae. And here's what happens. Our lawns inherently, our soil in Indiana inherently has a lot of phosphorus. And again, inadvertently, Hoosiers can over-fertilize our lawn, and because we inherently have good phosphorus levels in our soil, they end up percolating into our waterways or running off into our waterways. That leads to the blossoming of algae, and then when those algae die, bacteria eat them up, consume oxygen, and that kills fish. And then, of course, the green nature of the waterways that result from all that green algae leads to less light, which means the death of a lot of aquatic plants. So in other words, there can be real devastating effects to our lakes and streams because of excess phosphorus. Now the good news is that Indiana has made progress in this area. We have prohibited phosphorus-containing dishwasher and phosphorus-containing laundry detergent from entering on our waterways. And IDEM is about to initiate a rule that will reduce nutrients coming from industrial sources. Now, there's substantial scientific evidence that if we were to make more efforts in terms of reducing phosphorus-containing residential lawn fertilizer from going into our waterways, we would have an additional impact in reducing phosphorus going into our lakes and streams. And this is some really excellent peer-reviewed science, very recent, that shows the impact that that policy measure would have on our waterways. So our proposal that we'd like to see advanced, and we have the support of a lot of communities that very much are concerned about the pollution that's affecting their lakes and streams, is to find a way to curtail residential use of phosphorus-containing lawn fertilizers. And again, a number of states have passed it, some very recently, and done so without really imposing a cost impact on consumers. So I'll end this section with a slide showing from Steuben County, which is powered as a county by its recreational economy. And that if we make this sensible decision, which was actually sponsored in a bipartisan way last session, we will help to reduce that major source of contamination into our waterways.